The arrow catches sunlight for just a moment before it punches through the commander's throat. Kitbukha Noyan, veteran of 1,000 battles, architect of terror from Baghdad to Damascus, tumbles from his horse into the dust of a Palestinian valley. The Mongol general who helped destroy the greatest empire the world had ever seen, who rode with Hulagu Khan himself through rivers of blood, dies choking on his own in a place he'd never heard of 6 months earlier. September 3rd, 1260, the spring of Ain Jalut, and with that single arrow, the most unstoppable military force in human history stops. For 40 years, the Mongols have been winning. Not sometimes, always. From the steppes of Asia to the gates of Vienna, from the frozen north to the deserts of Persia, they've crushed every army that dared face them. Chinese dynasties? Annihilated. The Khwarezmian Empire? Erased so thoroughly most people today have never heard its name. The Abbasid Caliphate, ruling from Baghdad for 5 centuries, the golden heart of Islamic civilization? Hulagu Khan turned it into a cemetery in February 1258. The Tigris River ran black with ink from destroyed libraries, then red with the blood of perhaps 1 million dead. When you're a king in 1260 and you hear the Mongols are coming, you have 2 choices: surrender immediately or watch your city burn with your family inside. But right now, in this valley south of Nazareth, Mongol warriors are dying. The impossible is happening, and nobody saw it coming. 3 years earlier, Hulagu Khan sits in his camp outside Baghdad. The caliph has just surrendered. The city is his. His brother Möngke Khan, the great Khan ruling from Karakoram, has given him a mission: conquer everything to the Mediterranean Sea. Some men would see that as ambitious. Hulagu sees it as Tuesday. He has perhaps 120,000 warriors, the most sophisticated military machine ever created. They have systems, logistics, intelligence networks that would make modern spy agencies jealous. Signal arrows that coordinate movements across distances that shouldn't be possible. Horse remounts so they never slow down. And they know something every army they face is about to learn. There's a reason nomads conquered sedentary civilizations over and over throughout history. They're not held back by cities to defend. They're not slowed by supply lines. They are the supply line. Every man a warrior, every warrior a horseman, every horseman capable of shooting backwards at full gallop with accuracy that defies belief. The Mongol composite bow requires 160 pounds of draw strength. European knights use maybe 80. A Mongol warrior trains from age 4. By 20 he can put an arrow through chainmail at 200 yards while his horse is at full sprint. And he's carrying 60 arrows. Do the math on what a unit of 10,000 of these men can do to any medieval army. Baghdad fell in 12 days, the greatest city in the Islamic world, gone. Hulagu isn't cruel for entertainment. He's methodical. Terrifying, yes, but efficient. When cities surrender immediately, he's often merciful. When they resist, he makes examples so complete that the next 10 cities surrender before he arrives. It's psychological warfare perfected. And after Baghdad, the message is clear: nothing can stop this. Damascus hears what happened to Baghdad. When Mongol scouts appear on their horizon in March 1260, the city opens its gates. Smart. The governor throws a feast for Hulagu's generals. Everyone's alive, the city's intact, and the Mongols continue their march. Next stop, Egypt. Or so Hulagu thinks. Then a messenger arrives from Mongolia. Möngke Khan is dead. Not in battle, illness probably. But dead means the Kurultai, the Great Assembly, must convene to choose the next great Khan. And Hulagu, as a grandson of Genghis Khan himself, has to be there. This isn't optional. This is the succession of an empire that stretches from Korea to Poland. So Hulagu makes a calculation. He takes most of his army and rides east, leaves behind perhaps 20,000 men under Kitbukha, 20,000 Mongols to hold everything from Baghdad to Damascus and finish the conquest of Egypt. Now, 20,000 elite Mongol warriors is still a force that should terrify anyone. Kitbukha is no fool. He's Armenian Christian by birth, brilliant tactician, loyal to the core, and he's seen what happens to armies that face Mongol cavalry. He's confident. Why wouldn't he be? Name one army that's beaten the Mongols in a major engagement in the past 40 years. Go ahead, I'll wait. You can't, because there isn't one. But there's something Kitbukha doesn't fully understand about Egypt. Something different, Something that's been brewing in Cairo, a weapon the Mongols have never faced before. Slave soldiers. That sounds wrong to modern ears. Slaves? As elite warriors? But the Mamluks aren't slaves in the way you're imagining. They're taken as boys, usually from Turkic or Circassian regions, bought by the Ayyubid sultans and then transformed. They're raised together, trained together, they fight together, they're given military education that rivals anything in the world. Horsemanship, swordsmanship, archery, tactics. And here's the key. Their loyalty isn't to tribe or nation or family. It's to each other and to their regiment. They're a professional military caste in an era of feudal levies and tribal warriors. They're disciplined, they're cohesive, and by 1260 they've staged a coup. The Ayyubid Sultan is dead. The Mamluks rule Egypt now. Their commander, Qutuz, has crowned himself Sultan in Cairo. Some of his emirs aren't thrilled about this. There's a particularly ambitious commander named Baybars who thinks maybe he should be Sultan, but they've got bigger problems. Because Mongol messengers arrived in Cairo with a letter for whoever's in charge. The letter is almost polite. Almost. It's from Hulagu Khan, and it basically says, I've destroyed empires you've never heard of. I've turned cities to dust. I've executed caliphs and kings. You know what happened to Baghdad. You know what happened to Damascus. Surrender now, and perhaps you'll live. Resist, and Cairo becomes a memory. Qutuz reads this letter in front of his court. He knows what happened to the last rulers who ignored Mongol ultimatums. He knows his emirs are watching him. He knows some of them are already calculating whether surrendering might save their positions. He knows that the smart play, the safe play, is to at least negotiate, send gifts, buy time. Maybe the Mongols will be satisfied with tribute. Instead, Qutuz does something that makes everyone in the room go silent. He kills the messengers, has them cut in half and hung from the city gates. Killing ambassadors is the ultimate declaration: we will never surrender. There's no negotiation anymore, no diplomacy. It's total war or nothing. His emirs think he's insane. Even Baybars, who's no coward, thinks this might be suicide. But Qutuz understands something about the Mongol mystique that others don't. It's not just about their military skill, though that's real. It's about the psychological factor, the inevitability, the sense that resistance is futile. Terror is the Mongols' greatest weapon, and terror only works if you accept it. Qutuz is betting everything on a simple idea: if we show fear, we're already dead. If we fight, we might die, but we might also win. And if we win, we break something more important than an army. We break the myth. Still, he's not stupid. He mobilizes everything, every Mamluk regiment, every allied force he can scrape together. He empties the treasury to fund the campaign. And he does something clever. He sends a message to the Crusader states in the Levant. You and I have been enemies for generations, he says, but the Mongols will destroy us both. Let me move my army through your territory. Let me get to the Mongols before they get to us. And in return, I won't attack you. Temporary truce. The enemy of my enemy isn't quite my friend, but maybe he's useful. The Crusaders, shocked that a Muslim sultan is asking permission instead of just invading, agree. Akka opens its ports. The Mamluks march through Crusader lands unopposed. It's surreal. These armies have been killing each other since 1099, but the Mongol threat is so overwhelming it creates this bizarre moment of cooperation. July 1260. Qutuz leads roughly 20,000 men north from Egypt. He knows Kitbukha has about the same number. He knows the Mongols are better horsemen, better archers, more experienced. He knows that in every major battle, Mongol tactics have crushed their enemies. The feigned retreat that draws armies into ambushes, the hammer and anvil cavalry charges, the coordinated archery volleys that blacken the sky. He knows all of this, and he marches anyway. Kitbukha, hearing that the Mamluks are actually coming to fight rather than surrender, is probably delighted. Finally, an enemy with spine. He'll enjoy crushing them. He sends scouts to track the Mamluk army. He chooses his ground carefully. The Mongols always choose the ground, wide open spaces where cavalry can maneuver, where they can use their speed and archery, where infantry gets slaughtered. But Qutuz isn't marching to where Kitbukha wants to fight. He's moving toward Ain Jalut, Goliath Spring, in the Jezreel Valley. And he's thinking about something that most commanders who face the Mongols never lived long enough to implement. What if you turn their own tactics against them? The landscape at Ain Jalut isn't the wide-open steppe that Mongols love. It's got hills, vegetation, places to hide large formations. Qutuz arrives first, and he sets a trap that requires either genius or desperation, maybe both. He hides most of his army, takes his best units and conceals them in the hills around the valley. Then he leaves a small force visible in the valley itself. The bait, commanded by Baybars, who's volunteered for what might be a suicide mission. The plan is simple in concept, terrifying in execution. When the Mongols see Baybars' small force, they'll attack. And Baybars will run, lead them on a chase, draw them into the valley past the hidden Mamluk units. And then, when the Mongols are extended and disorganized, the trap closes. It's the Mongol feigned retreat tactic, but reversed. The Mongols invented this strategy. They've used it to destroy armies across 2 continents. And now Qutuz is betting that he can use it on them before they realize what's happening. September 3rd dawns hot. Kitbukha's scouts report Mamluk forces in the valley. Not the whole army, maybe a few thousand. Kitbukha knows Qutuz has more men than that. So where are they? Is this an ambush? Or is Qutuz's army scattered, and this is just their advance guard? Here's where we need to understand Mongol confidence. It's not arrogance, it's the result of 40 years of victory. They've seen enemies try ambushes before. They've crushed them anyway. The Mongol scouting is the best in the world. Their intelligence gathering is legendary. If there's a trap, they'll spot it and counter it. And even if they're IS an ambush, they're Mongols. They've won battles where they were outnumbered 5-1. Kitbukha makes his decision: attack. The Mongol cavalry comes down like a storm. Baybars sees them coming. Thousands of horsemen, the thunder of hooves shaking the ground, the dust cloud rising like smoke. His men are outnumbered right now, and they know it. Everything depends on timing. Retreat too soon, and the Mongols will smell the trap. Stand too long, and they'll be overrun and slaughtered. Baybars holds. The Mongols close to archery range. Arrows start flying. Mamluk horses scream and fall. Men die. The Mongol composite bows are punching through armor, through shields, through everything. The disciplined Mongol volleys, they don't shoot wild, they shoot in waves, overlapping fields of fire. Start tearing apart Baybars' formation. Now. He signals the retreat. His men turn and run. Not panicked, controlled, fast, but not scattered. They know where they're going. They're running deeper into the valley, toward the spring, leading the Mongols forward. And Kitbukha sees enemy cavalry fleeing. It's what enemies always do when they face the Mongols. They break, they run, and when they run, they die tired. He orders the pursuit. The Mongol cavalry accelerates. They're in their element now, the chase, the hunt. They're shooting backwards as they ride forward, still hitting targets. Mamluk warriors fall from their saddles, arrows in their backs. Baybars keeps going, he's counting distance, counting time. The hidden Mamluk forces in the hills are waiting for his signal. Too early, and the Mongols can escape. Too late, and he's dead. He glances back. The Mongol front line is perhaps 200 yards behind him. The main force is strung out, the fastest riders ahead, the rest following. They're extended, perfect. He raises his hand, the signal. From the hills, from the concealed positions, 10,000 Mamluk cavalry erupt. They come from both sides of the valley, crashing into the Mongol flanks. Kitbukha realizes in an instant what's happened. They've been ambushed, with their own tactic. He's shocked, but he's a general who survived 100 battles. He starts shouting orders, trying to reform his lines, trying to turn the cavalry to face the new threats. But the Mamluks aren't done. Baybars has stopped running. He's turned his force around. And now he's charging back at the Mongol vanguard. Front and flanks. The Mongols are surrounded. Now, understand, this should still be winnable for the Mongols. They've fought their way out of worse situations. They're trained for chaos. Every warrior knows how to fight independently if formations break down. Kitbukha is screaming orders, his officers are adapting. The Mongol cavalry is trying to create space to use their bows. But the Mamluks aren't fighting like the armies the Mongols are used to. They're not peasant levies who break when pressed. They're not feudal knights who charge blindly. They're professional soldiers who've trained their entire lives for this exact scenario. They match the Mongol horsemanship. They match the archery. And in close quarters, with swords and maces, they're devastating. The battle becomes a melee. Thousands of horsemen in a space too small, the organized tactics breaking down into hundreds of individual struggles. Dust everywhere, blood, screaming, horses trampling wounded men, officers trying to rally their units. The Mongols are fighting with everything they have, but they can't maneuver. The Mamluks keep pressing, keep pushing them together, denying them space. Kitbukha is in the thick of it, sword in hand. He's killing Mamluks personally, trying to hold his center together. If he can just stabilize the line, if he can just create enough space, his warriors can do what they do best. But the Mamluks won't give him that space. They're everywhere. Hours pass, the sun climbs, men fight until they can't lift their arms, then fight more. The spring at Ain Jalut runs red, bodies pile up. Horses without riders stumble through the carnage. The noise is unbearable, metal on metal. Screaming men, dying horses, officers shouting commands that nobody can hear. And slowly, impossibly, the Mongols start losing ground. Not routing, they're too disciplined, too proud for that. But they're being killed, pushed back, overwhelmed by numbers and position. Kitbukha sees his army fragmenting, units getting isolated and destroyed. Warriors he's commanded for years going down under Mamluk blades. He makes a decision. He's going to die here. He knows it. But he's going to die like a Mongol general should, fighting. He gathers what's left of his personal guard, maybe 100 warriors, and they charge directly at where they think Qutuz is. If they can kill the Mamluk Sultan, maybe the enemy will break, maybe this can still be salvaged. They cut through Mamluk lines like they've cut through 100 battlefields. These are Kitbukha's best. Veterans who fought from China to Syria. They're surrounded by enemies and they don't care. They're trying to reach Qutuz. They almost make it. Almost. The Mamluk counterattack hits them from 3 sides. Kitbukha's guard goes down fighting. Every single one. And Kitbukha himself, his armor dented and bloody, his horse stumbling beneath him, gets hit by arrows from multiple directions. One catches his throat. He falls. The last thing he sees is probably the sky above Palestine, far from the Mongolian steppes where he was born, far from his Khan, surrounded by enemies. When Kitbukha falls, the Mongol resistance collapses. Not because they're cowards, they're not, but because their command structure is broken and they're already outnumbered in a battle where they can't use their advantages. The survivors break, they scatter. The Mamluks pursue, it becomes a rout. Thousands of Mongol warriors flee east, trying to reach Mongol-controlled Syria. Most don't make it. The Mamluks chase them down. By sunset, it's over. The spring at Ain Jalut is a slaughterhouse. Bodies everywhere. Mamluk casualties are heavy. This wasn't a clean victory. But the Mongols have been shattered. The army Kitbukha led into battle doesn't exist anymore. Some escaped, enough to bring news back to the Mongol territories. But as a fighting force, it's gone. Qutuz stands in the aftermath, covered in dust and blood, and he understands what just happened. It's not just a victory. It's the first major defeat the Mongols have suffered since Genghis Khan unified the tribes. The myth of invincibility is broken. The psychological warfare that terrified kings from Vienna to Beijing just failed. The Mongols can be beaten. With the right tactics, the right troops, the right terrain, they're mortal. News spreads like wildfire. The Mongols lost. In Egypt, in Damascus, in every Muslim city that was preparing for the apocalypse, people can barely believe it. In Crusader territories, they're shocked. The Mamluks did what the greatest armies of Europe and Asia couldn't do. They stopped the Mongol advance. But here's where the story takes a turn that nobody sees coming. Qutuz leads his victorious army back toward Egypt. He's a hero. He's the Sultan who saved Islam from the Mongol terror. Kingdoms want to send him tribute. His position has never been stronger. October 1260, Qutuz is traveling through Sinai with his commanders. They're celebrating, planning, thinking about how they'll rebuild, how they'll consolidate their victory. And Baybars, riding alongside Qutuz, is thinking about something else. Baybars led the bait force. He risked everything in that valley. He helped win the most important battle in a generation. And Qutuz gets all the glory. Qutuz is Sultan. Baybars is still just an emir. They stop to hunt. Baybars and several other emirs approach Qutuz. They're smiling, friendly. They've done this 1,000 times. And then Baybars draws his sword and drives it into Qutuz's chest. The other emirs join in. The Sultan who defeated the Mongols dies not in glorious battle but murdered by his own commanders in the desert, betrayed by the man who helped him win. Baybars declares himself Sultan. Some emirs object. They die too. Baybars is not a man who tolerates opposition. And just like that, less than 2 months after Ain Jalut, Egypt has a new ruler. The man who actually executed the bait and ambush tactic that won the battle is now in charge. History will remember him as one of the greatest Mamluk sultans. It will also remember that he took power through assassination. But the victory at Ain Jalut stands regardless of who's sultan. The Mongols never recover their momentum in the west. They hold Persia, they hold Iraq, but they never take Egypt. They never crush the Mamluks. The border essentially freezes. Islam survives as a major civilization. If Kitbukha had won at Ain Jalut, Mongol forces might have taken Cairo, might have conquered North Africa, might have pushed into Arabia itself. The holy cities of Mecca and Medina could have fallen. The entire trajectory of Islamic civilization could have ended the way the Abbasid Caliphate ended, in rivers of blood and burning libraries. Instead, the Mamluks remain a major power for the next 2.5 centuries. They eventually drive the last crusaders out of the Holy Land. They become the protectors of Islamic civilization. And it all traces back to that valley, that spring, that desperate gamble that worked. The Mongol Empire continues, obviously. It's still the largest contiguous land empire in human history. But it stops expanding westward. Hulagu returns from Mongolia eventually, but he never launches another major campaign into Mamluk territory. The succession crisis fragments Mongol unity. Different khanates start prioritizing different objectives. The Ilkhanate in Persia fights the Golden Horde in Russia. The unity that made them unstoppable fractures. Some historians argue Ain Jalut saved Western civilization. That's probably overstating it. The Mongols might have stopped at geographical barriers anyway. But it's not crazy to suggest that if the Mongols had conquered Egypt, if they'd had unlimited access to Mediterranean resources and trade, their reach might have extended further. Europe was already panicking. The Mongols had smashed Hungarian and Polish armies in 1241. Only the death of Ogedei Khan and another succession crisis stopped that advance. If there'd been no effective resistance in the Middle East, if the Mongol momentum had continued unbroken, who knows how far they'd have gone. But we do know this. After Ain Jalut, the Mongol advance stops. The empire consolidates what it has. It slowly transforms from a conquering horde to established khanates with defined borders. The terror weapon loses its edge. Commanders in other regions hear about Ain Jalut and they think, if the Mamluks can win, maybe we can too. The psychological dominance breaks. It doesn't happen overnight, but the shift begins in that valley. There's something poetic about the location. Ain Jalut, Goliath's spring, the place where, according to biblical tradition, David killed Goliath. And in 1260, another underdog supposedly too weak, too outmatched, kills another giant. The symbolism isn't lost on the people of the time. They see divine intervention. They see destiny. Modern historians see brilliant tactics and professional soldiers. Both views are probably correct in their own way. Think about the individual decisions that made this possible. Qutuz deciding to kill the Mongol ambassadors, knowing it meant total war. That's not rational calculation, that's courage or insanity, maybe both. Baybars volunteering to lead the bait force, knowing the Mongols would chase him with intent to kill every single man. That's accepting the possibility of death for a plan that might not work. The Mamluk soldiers hidden in those hills, waiting in the heat while they listen to their comrades dying in the valley, trusting that the signal will come before it's too late. That's discipline beyond what most armies could muster. And on the other side, Kitbukha choosing to pursue, believing in Mongol superiority enough to charge into terrain that wasn't ideal. That's not stupidity, that's the confidence earned by 40 years of victories. He'd seen armies try to ambush Mongols before. It never worked. Why would this time be different? Except it was. The one time it mattered most, the Mongol military system failed. Or rather, it encountered an enemy that matched its sophistication and beat it at its own game. The Mamluks weren't lucky. They were good. They trained for years to achieve the horsemanship and archery to match Mongol warriors. They studied Mongol tactics. They'd been watching the Mongol conquests, hearing the stories, learning. When Qutuz planned the ambush, he knew exactly what he was copying and why. The Mamluks earned their victory through preparation and skill. But they also had something the Mongols' previous enemies lacked: nowhere to run. The Mamluks were fighting for survival. Cairo was the last major Islamic power standing. If they lost, Islam might not have ended, but its political and military power would have been shattered. That kind of existential pressure creates a different kind of soldier. You fight differently when you know defeat means the end of everything. The Mongols, by contrast, were at the end of a very long supply line. They'd been campaigning for years. They were far from their main bases. And, crucially, Hulagu had taken most of the army home. Kitbukha was operating with a fraction of the force that destroyed Baghdad. That matters. Numbers aren't everything in medieval warfare, but they're not nothing either. The Mongols were used to having numerical superiority, or at least parity plus superior tactics. At Ain Jalut, they had neither. Still, the fact that they almost won anyway shows how dangerous they were. The battle lasted hours. It was close. If the ambush had been sprung 30 seconds too early or too late, the Mongols might have escaped the trap and reset the engagement. If Kitbukha had been more cautious, if he'd sent better scouts, if he'd recognized the terrain disadvantages sooner, the outcome might have been different. History turns on tiny margins sometimes. In the decades after Ain Jalut, both sides learn from the battle. The Mongols never again commit to a major Western campaign without overwhelming force. They consolidate their holdings, fortify their borders, and focus on maintaining what they have. The Mamluks become the dominant power in the eastern Mediterranean. Under Baybars, they'll launch campaigns that recapture Mongol-held territories in Syria. They'll besiege and take crusader fortresses. They'll create a military state that lasts until the Ottoman conquest in 1517. But here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. The Mamluks and Mongols eventually develop a relationship. Not friendly exactly, but pragmatic. They trade. They exchange diplomatic missions. The Ilkhanate in Persia, under Hulagu and his successors, becomes less interested in conquering Egypt and more interested in dealing with their Mongol cousins to the north, who are also competing for resources and territory. The Muslim world and the Mongol world settle into an equilibrium. And what about the Crusaders? They survive another few decades, but they're doomed. Baybars sees them as soft targets, and he's right. The Crusader states never recovered from their losses to Saladin, and they never recovered their unity. The Mamluks pick them off one by one. Antioch falls in 1268. Acre, the last major Crusader city, falls in 1291. The Crusades effectively end not because of European decisions, but because the Mamluks eliminate them. The same military machine that stopped the Mongols finishes what Saladin started. There's an irony there. The Crusaders let the Mamluk army pass through their territory to fight the Mongols, hoping that the two Islamic powers would weaken each other. Instead, the Mamluks won, grew stronger, and eventually destroyed the Crusader states entirely. Miscalculation doesn't begin to describe it. For the Mongols, Ain Jalut becomes a cautionary tale. They remain a massive empire, but the invincibility is gone. Future generations of Mongol leaders are more careful. They pick their battles, they don't assume victory. The lesson is learned in blood. And eventually, the Mongol Empire fragments into separate khanates that fight each other as often as they fight external enemies. The Yuan dynasty in China, the Golden Horde in Russia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia. They all claim descent from Genghis Khan, but they pursue different interests. The unified Mongol war machine that conquered everything from Beijing to Baghdad never reforms. Could it have been different? If Monkey Khan hadn't died, if Hulagu hadn't been forced to return to Mongolia, would the full Mongol army have conquered Egypt? Probably. The Mamluks were good, but 60,000 Mongol warriors with full logistical support would have been overwhelming. The Mamluks won because they faced a fraction of the Mongol power at a moment when circumstances favored them. Timing matters. Location matters. Leadership matters. All three aligned for the Mamluks in September 1260. But let's not diminish what they achieved. They saw an opportunity and they seized it. Qutuz could have surrendered. He could have tried to negotiate. He could have done what dozens of other rulers did when faced with Mongol power. He chose to fight. Baybars could have refused the suicide mission of leading the bait force. He took it. The Mamluk soldiers could have broken when the Mongols charged. They held. The victory at Ain Jalut required courage at every level, from the Sultan making strategic decisions to the individual warrior holding his ground in the valley. And it's worth remembering the human cost. Thousands died at Ain Jalut. Most of them are nameless now. We remember Kitbukha because he was a general. We remember Qutuz and Baybars because they were sultans. But the men who actually fought and bled and died in that valley, the ordinary Mamluk troopers and Mongol horsemen who never got mentioned in chronicles, they paid the price. War is glorious in hindsight for the winners. In the moment, it's terrifying and painful and traumatic. The men who survived Ain Jalut carried physical and psychological scars for the rest of their lives. The battle changed the Middle East permanently. It established the Mamluks as the protectors of Islam. It stopped the Mongol western expansion. It demonstrated that nomadic horse archers, the dominant military technology of the medieval period, could be beaten by disciplined professional soldiers using the same tactics. That's a lesson that reverberates through military history. It's not about having the best individual warriors, though that helps. It's about having a system, a structure, a tactical doctrine that can adapt and counter the enemy's advantages. The Mongols built an empire with a military system that worked everywhere, until it didn't. One battle, one day, one valley in Palestine. That's all it took to stop them. Not forever. They were still dangerous for decades, but they never again seemed unstoppable. The myth broke, and myths once broken can't be repaired. Imagine being a ruler in 1261 hearing news of Ain Jalut. For 40 years you've heard stories of Mongol invincibility, cities destroyed, armies annihilated, empires erased. And suddenly the Mamluks won. That changes everything. It changes what's possible. It changes what you're willing to risk. It changes the calculation of resistance versus surrender. Ain Jalut didn't just stop a Mongol army, it changed the psychology of power in the medieval world. And here's the final twist. The Mongol Empire ultimately adapted and survived. The Ilkhanate, ruling Persia and Iraq, eventually converted to Islam. Ghazan Khan, Hulagu's great-grandson, becomes Muslim in 1295. The descendants of the men who destroyed Baghdad end up as Muslim rulers themselves. The Yuan dynasty in China creates a sophisticated administration that blends Mongol and Chinese elements. The Golden Horde in Russia becomes a major power that lasts into the 15th century. The Mongol legacy isn't just destruction, it's also synthesis, adaptation, cultural exchange. The empire transforms from a force of pure conquest into something more complex. But that transformation begins with defeats like Ain Jalut. When you can't conquer anymore, you have to adapt. When you can't rely on terror and military superiority, you have to build relationships, trade networks, diplomatic ties. The Mongols learned to do all of that. They became empire builders instead of empire destroyers. And while that's less dramatic than the conquests of Genghis Khan and Hulagu, it's probably more historically significant. The Mongol impact on trade, cultural exchange, and the movement of ideas across Eurasia shapes the medieval and early modern world in ways that last longer than any battle. So Ain Jalut matters on multiple levels. Tactically, it's a masterpiece. A successful ambush using the enemy's own tactics against them. Strategically, it stops the Mongol advance and saves Egypt. Politically, it elevates the Mamluks to great power status and leads directly to the end of the Crusades. Psychologically, it breaks the myth of Mongol invincibility. And historically, it marks the beginning of the Mongol Empire's transformation from expansion to consolidation. And it all comes down to a spring in Palestine, a desperate gamble, and a Mongol general dying with an arrow in his throat, wondering how this happened. Kitbukha led armies that destroyed cities. He served Khans who commanded half the known world. He survived battles that killed thousands. And he died in an ambush because one Muslim sultan refused to surrender and one ambitious emir was willing to risk everything to win. War is full of ironies. The Mongol tactic of feigned retreat, used successfully across Asia and Europe, gets turned against them by soldiers who studied their methods. Qutuz saves Islam and gets murdered by his own subordinate before he can enjoy his victory. Baybars commits regicide and becomes one of history's most successful sultans. The Crusaders help the Mamluks defeat the Mongols, then get destroyed by those same Mamluks. The Mongols lose one battle and it changes everything, even though they still control the largest empire in the world. But the biggest irony might be this. For all the death, all the conquest, all the empires rising and falling, what actually matters in the long run is what people learn and remember. The Mongols learned that terror has limits. The Mamluks learned that professional military training can overcome seemingly impossible odds. The Islamic world learned that it could survive existential threats. Europe learned that the Mongol advance could be stopped. All of that knowledge, all those lessons, flow from one battle in 1260. Stand at Ain Jalut today and you see farmland. Quiet, peaceful. Nothing marks where thousands died. No monuments adequate to the scale of what happened here. The spring still flows, water bubbling up from the ground like it has for millennia, indifferent to the blood that once mixed with its current. Tourists pass through the Jezreel Valley barely aware that this unremarkable patch of earth was once the hinge upon which history turned. But the absence of monuments doesn't diminish what occurred. Sometimes the most important events leave the smallest physical traces. Ain Jalut changed the world not through what it built, but through what it prevented. Every Muslim city that wasn't burned, every library that wasn't destroyed, every generation that lived because Cairo survived. The invisible monument to Ain Jalut is everything that continued to exist because the Mongols stopped here. Think about the weight of command in that moment. Qutuz, making the decision to fight, knowing that if he's wrong, if his army breaks, if the ambush fails, he's not just losing a battle, he's ending Islamic civilization as a political force. The Mongol track record says he's about to die. Every piece of evidence says the smart move is surrender, and he chooses war anyway. That's not blind courage, that's calculated defiance. He looked at the odds, understood them completely, and decided that some things matter more than survival. Military historians study Ain Jalut for the tactics, the beautiful execution of the bait and ambush, the way the Mamluks used terrain that negated Mongol advantages, the discipline required to hold hidden positions while listening to your comrades fight outnumbered, the timing of the trap's release. It's textbook asymmetric warfare. Take away the enemy's strengths, force them to fight your kind of battle, use their expectations against them. But the tactics only worked because of years of preparation nobody saw. The Mamluk training system that created soldiers capable of matching Mongol horsemen, the intelligence gathering that let them understand Mongol methods, the unit cohesion that kept them from breaking under pressure. You can't improvise that on the battlefield. Qutuz won at Ain Jalut because of decisions made years earlier by Ayyubid sultans who invested in professional military education. They created the weapon. Qutuz just wielded it at the right moment. And what about Kitbukha's perspective in his final moments? He's falling from his horse, throat pierced, drowning in his own blood, and he has maybe 10 seconds of consciousness left. What goes through his mind? Does he understand that he just lost the battle that matters most? Does he think about Hulagu, wondering what his Khan will say when news arrives? Does he curse himself for not seeing the trap? Or is he just confused, dying far from home in a war he thought was already won? We'll never know. Dead men don't write memoirs. But there's something tragic about Kitbukha specifically. He was Armenian Christian, fighting for a Mongol pagan Khan, killed by Muslim soldiers in a valley sacred to 3 religions. He probably saw himself as bringing order through Mongol power, ending the chaos of petty kingdoms and religious wars. The Mongol Empire, for all its brutality, did create stability in the territories it controlled. The Pax Mongolica would eventually facilitate trade and cultural exchange on an unprecedented scale. Kitbukha wasn't a monster. He was a general serving his empire, doing what generals do, and he died because he faced soldiers just as professional as himself, fighting for their survival in terrain that neutralized his advantages. History has no villains, not really, just people making choices with incomplete information, serving causes they believe in, trying to achieve objectives that make sense from their perspective. The Mongols weren't evil, they were effective. The Mamluks weren't heroes, they were desperate. Everyone at Ain Jalut was human, which means everyone was complicated, but outcomes matter more than intentions. The Mongol advance stopped, that's what matters. Whether Kitbukha was a good man or Qutuz was noble or Baybars was honorable is less important than the fact that Islamic civilization survived as a major force. Millions of people lived lives they wouldn't have lived if the Mongols had won. Cultures developed that would have been extinguished. Ideas spread that would have been lost. The Battle of Ain Jalut is significant not for what happened there, but for what didn't happen afterward. Consider the counterfactual. Mongols defeat the Mamluks at Ain Jalut. Kitbukha marches on Cairo. The city falls within weeks. It has no army left to defend it. Egypt becomes part of the Ilkhanate. The Mongols control everything from the Mediterranean to the Pacific. The wealth of Egypt, the agricultural surplus of the Nile, the strategic position controlling trade routes. All Mongol resources now. With that base, do they push into North Africa? Do they eventually cross into Iberia, where Muslim kingdoms still hold territory? Do they coordinate with their cousins in the Golden Horde and squeeze Europe from two directions? Maybe. Maybe not. Logistics and geography have their own logic. But the possibility existed, and Qutuz closed it. One battle, one day. That's all it took to redirect the course of civilizations. The human mind struggles with alternate histories. We see what happened and it feels inevitable. Of course, the Mamluks won at Ain Jalut. It's in the history books. But stand in that valley in the morning of September 3rd, 1260, before the fighting starts, and nothing is inevitable. The Mongols have never lost a major engagement like this. They have every reason to expect victory. Their tactics have destroyed more sophisticated armies. Kitbukha is a proven commander. His warriors are the best in the world at what they do. The Mamluks are betting everything on one ambush. If it fails, if the Mongols see through it, if the timing is off by minutes, they lose. And losing means Cairo falls. And Cairo falling means Islam loses its last major military power. It's all balanced on a knife's edge. Baybars leading his men into the valley as bait, watching the Mongol cavalry thunder toward him, knowing that if Qutuz mistimes the trap release, Baybars and everyone with him dies for nothing. That's not a comfortable feeling. But the trap works. The flanking forces hit at the right moment. The Mongols get pinned. The battle becomes a melee where Mongol advantages in mobility and archery count for less. And the Mamluks, fighting for survival on favorable ground with equal numbers and equal skill, grind out a victory measured in blood and bodies. After the battle, the survivors on both sides have to process what happened. For the Mongols, it's probably incomprehensible at first. They lost. How? They're Mongols. They don't lose. Except they just did. The psychological impact might be worse than the military impact. Every Mongol warrior grows up hearing stories of conquest. Genghis Khan, Ogedei, Monke, Hulagu, unbroken string of victories. And now Kitbukha is dead and the army is scattered and they're running for their lives. That shatters something fundamental in their worldview. For the Mamluks, it's vindication. They believed they could win. They trained for it. They planned for it. They executed the plan. And it worked. That creates a kind of confidence that can't be taught. They faced the worst enemy in the world and beat them. After Ain Jalut, Mamluk soldiers know they can accomplish anything. That confidence will serve them well in the coming decades as they reconquer Syria and eliminate the Crusaders. But there's a darkness underneath the victory. Qutuz knows he won. He knows his place in history is secure. He's the Sultan who stopped the Mongols. And then Baybars kills him. Why? Ambition, certainly. Baybars wants power. But maybe there's more to it. Maybe Baybars sees Qutuz as weak in ways that don't show on the battlefield. Maybe there are political calculations we don't understand from this distance. Maybe Baybars genuinely believes he'll be a better sultan. And here's the thing, he's right. Baybars rules for 17 years and he's ruthlessly effective. He fortifies Egypt's defenses. He reorganizes the military. He creates an intelligence network that rivals the Mongols. He launches campaigns that expand Mamluk territory. He's brutal, yes. He massacres crusader populations, he assassinates rivals, he rules through fear as much as respect. But he's also competent. Egypt prospers under his rule, relatively speaking. He builds the stable foundation that lets the Mamluk Sultanate endure for centuries. So was killing Qutuz justified? Modern ethics say no, murder is murder. But medieval political ethics are different. Power comes from strength, and strength means the willingness to take power when opportunity arises. Baybars sees an opportunity. He takes it. And he makes it work. History doesn't judge him harshly for it. He's remembered as a great sultan despite the regicide. Context matters. Results matter. But imagine Qutuz's last moments. He's riding through Sinai, victorious, celebrating with his commanders. He trusts these men. They fought together. They won together. And then Baybars approaches, smiling, and drives a sword through his chest. The betrayal is absolute. Qutuz dies knowing that everything he won, all the glory, all the achievement, Baybars is taking. There's no justice there. Just power changing hands the way it often does, violently and without ceremony. The Middle East in 1260 is a brutal place. The Mongol conquests have killed millions. The Crusades have been bleeding the region for 160 years. Internal conflicts between Muslim rulers have devastated cities. Survival requires hardness. Sentimentality gets you killed. Qutuz understood this when he executed the Mongol ambassadors. Baybars understood this when he executed Qutuz. Everyone's hands are bloody. Everyone's made choices that look monstrous from modern perspectives. You judge them by their context or you don't judge them at all. And in that context, Ain Jalut is a miracle. Not because God intervened, though people at the time certainly believed that, but because all the necessary factors aligned. Right commander, right troops, right tactics, right terrain, right moment in Mongol expansion when they're overextended and undermanned. Remove any one factor and the Mongols probably win. History is contingent. Small changes create massive consequences. What if Möngke Khan doesn't die in 1259? Hulagu stays in the Middle East with his full army. Does Qutuz even fight? Does he try the same ambush against 60,000 Mongol warriors instead of 20,000? Probably not. Probably he surrenders or flees and the Mongols take Egypt without a major battle. The whole Middle Eastern power balance shifts. Alternate timeline, completely different world. What if Qutuz loses his nerve and doesn't kill the Mongol ambassadors, opens negotiations instead? Maybe he buys time. Maybe he becomes a Mongol vassal. Maybe Egypt survives as a tributary state. But it's not independent. It's not a major power. The Mamluks don't become the defenders of Islam. The Crusaders probably last longer because there's no strong Muslim state to eliminate them. Everything downstream changes. What if Baybars' bait force breaks too early? The Mongols see the trap and refuse to commit. They withdraw, regroup, and come back with better intelligence and a different plan. Maybe they win the second battle. Maybe they avoid battle entirely and just besiege Cairo, starving it out. The Mamluks were good at field battles. They were less good at defending static positions against a patient, ruthless enemy. What if Kitbukha survives the battle? He's wounded but escapes with remnants of his army. He retreats to Syria, reorganizes and asks for reinforcements from the Ilkhanate. Hulagu, informed of the defeat, sends him another 20,000 warriors. Kitbukha invades Egypt again in 1261, and this time he wins. Does the Mongol expansion restart? These aren't just parlor games. They're reminders that history isn't predetermined. It's made by people making decisions in moments of uncertainty. Qutuz didn't know his ambush would work. He hoped, he planned, he believed, but he didn't know. Nobody knows outcomes before they happen. Everyone's gambling with imperfect information and incomplete understanding of consequences. That makes historical figures more impressive, not less. We read about their achievements in books and it feels inevitable because we know how it turned out. But they didn't know. They acted anyway. That requires courage on a level most of us never face. Qutuz committed to total war against the most dangerous enemy in the world. That's not ignorance, that's bravery. Even if he died for it, even if Baybars took the credit. He made the choice that mattered. The spring at Ain Jalut still flows, water that Mongol horses drank, water that Mamluk warriors used to wash blood from their hands, water that has no memory of what happened here, that just continues its eternal cycle, indifferent to human affairs. There's something humbling about that. Empires rise and fall, armies clash, civilizations hang in the balance, and a spring just keeps flowing, exactly the same, regardless of who wins or loses. Maybe that's the real lesson of Ain Jalut. Not the tactics or the politics or the strategic implications, just the reminder that human concerns, no matter how important they feel, are temporary. The spring doesn't care who controls Egypt. The valley doesn't care if the Mongols or Mamluks win. Nature continues. Only humans make things matter through the meanings we assign, and we've assigned enormous meaning to Ain Jalut. We call it a turning point. A crucial battle. The moment the Mongol expansion stopped. We're not wrong. Those things are true. But they're true because humans decided they're true. Because chroniclers wrote about it. Because historians studied it. Because people in Cairo and Baghdad and Damascus felt saved when they heard the news. The battle matters because it mattered to the people who lived through its consequences. But here, in this valley, on this ground, there's nothing special. Just earth and water and sky. The same earth and water and sky that witnessed 100 other forgotten battles. The same earth and water and sky that will witness whatever comes next. Ain Jalut is significant not because the place is special, but because what happened here rippled forward through time, affecting millions of people who never heard of this valley and never will. That's how history works. Tiny moments creating massive consequences. One arrow finds one throat. One general falls. One army breaks. One civilization survives. And everything after is different because of it. The butterfly effect, centuries before anyone called it that. Kitbukha dies and Islam survives and the Crusades end, and the Mamluks rule Egypt for 250 years, and all of it traces back to a battle that lasted hours in a valley nobody remembers. Walk through the Jezreel Valley today and you're walking through layered history. This is where Deborah and Barak fought the Canaanites according to the book of Judges, where the Philistines defeated Saul, where countless armies marched and fought and died, leaving almost no trace. The soil is rich because it's been fertilized by blood for thousands of years. Every civilization that passed through here left bodies behind. Ain Jalut is just one more layer in the archaeological record of violence. But it's a significant layer, because this time the outcome mattered globally. The Mongol Empire was a world historical force. Stopping it was a world historical achievement. The Mamluks didn't just win a battle. They altered the trajectory of human civilization. That's not hyperbole, that's demonstrable reality. Map the world if the Mongols won. Map the world with the Mamluks winning. They're different worlds. And we live in the one where the Mamluks won. So maybe we owe Qutuz something. Recognition, at least. He gambled everything and won, even if he didn't live to enjoy it. He made the choice that saved his civilization. Flawed man, probably. Ruthless, certainly. But when it mattered most, he chose courage over capitulation. That counts for something. That counts for a lot. And Baybars, for all his brutality, built on that foundation. He took the victory at Ain Jalut and turned it into a dynasty. He transformed the Mamluks from desperate defenders into confident conquerors. He created the state that would protect Islam's heartland for generations. The blood on his hands doesn't erase those achievements, it just complicates them. History is complicated. People are complicated. We contain multitudes, as someone once said. Baybars was murderer and builder, betrayer and protector all at once. Kitbukha deserves recognition too. He lost, but he fought with everything he had. He led from the front. He died in battle rather than fleeing. There's honor in that, even in defeat. The Mongol military system he represented was the most sophisticated of its era. The fact that the Mamluks had to execute a perfect ambush just to match them says everything about Mongol capabilities. Kitbukha wasn't incompetent, he was good. The Mamluks were just better on that day, in that place, in that battle. Everyone involved was operating at the absolute peak of medieval military prowess. This wasn't amateur hour, this was professionals fighting professionals with everything on the line. The tactics were sophisticated, the execution was precise, the stakes were existential. Ain Jalut was war at its highest level, which makes it war at its most terrible. Because when everyone's competent, when everyone's trying their hardest, when everyone's using every advantage they can find, a lot of people die. And they did die. Thousands of them. Most anonymously, most forgotten. Just names in casualty lists if they're lucky, not even that if they're not. They followed orders and fought hard, and some lived and most didn't. Their families mourned them. Their comrades remembered them. And then time moved on and they faded into history, indistinguishable from all the other warriors who died in all the other battles. That's the tragedy underlying every victory. Someone always pays. Usually someone who never chose to be there, who never wanted to fight, who just got swept up in forces beyond their control. The Mamluk trooper who takes a Mongol arrow in the chest. Did he want to be at Ain Jalut? Or did he want to be home with his family living a quiet life? We'll never know. He's dust now. They're all dust now, winners and losers alike. But the consequences of their battle still echo. The Mamluk Sultanate that emerged from Ain Jalut protected Islamic civilization during its most vulnerable period. It preserved cultural continuity, it maintained trade routes, it sponsored art and architecture and scholarship. Cairo under the Mamluks became one of the great cities of the world. The madrasas, the mosques, the libraries, none of that exists if the Mongols take Egypt in 1260. So when you study Ain Jalut, you're not just studying military history, you're studying the pivot point where one possible future died and another was born, where the Mongol destiny of universal conquest hit a wall it couldn't overcome, where professional soldiers proved that training and discipline and smart tactics could beat natural cavalry genius and 40 years of momentum, where the impossible became real because someone had the courage to try and the skill to execute. The sun sets over the Jezreel Valley the same way it set on September 3rd, 1260. Golden light. Long shadows. The same physical processes, utterly indifferent to human drama. But the world that night was different than the world that morning. Kitbukha was alive in the morning, dead by evening. Qutuz was a desperate gambler in the morning, the savior of Islam by evening. The Mongol Empire was unstoppable in the morning. Mortal by evening, everything changed. Not because of destiny or divine intervention or historical inevitability, because humans made it change. Through decisions and actions and sacrifice, through tactical brilliance and strategic courage, through the willingness to risk everything for a chance at survival. That's how history actually works, not through abstract forces or predetermined paths, through individual humans making choices that aggregate into massive consequences. Ain Jalut matters because people made it matter. Because Qutuz chose to fight. Because Baybars led the bait force. Because thousands of Mamluk soldiers held their positions in ambush. Because Kitbukha charged into the trap. Because everyone involved committed fully to their role. The outcome wasn't foreordained. It was achieved. With blood and courage and skill, and just enough luck to make the difference. That's the story of Ain Jalut. Not just a battle, a moment where human agency changed the course of civilizations, where the world balanced on a knife's edge and could have fallen either way, where it fell the way it did because specific people did specific things in specific ways. That's worth remembering, worth understanding, worth honoring in its way. The spring still flows, the valley still exists, the earth remembers nothing, but we remember. And in remembering, we keep alive the truth that history isn't written in advance. It's written by us, moment by moment, choice by choice, battle by battle. Ain Jalut reminds us that even when everything seems inevitable, even when the odds seem impossible, human courage and ingenuity can change everything. That's why this story matters. Not just for what it tells us about 1260, but for what it tells us about every moment where everything hangs in the balance and someone has to choose. Fight or flee, risk or surrender, courage or despair. Qutuz chose courage. The Mamluks chose to fight. And the world we live in is the result of that choice. made in a valley in Palestine at a spring called Goliath's 764 years ago, made by humans, for all of us who came after.